Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Maul.
And welcome to our Super Bowl 59 recap. We'll get into it, break down the game. We all got to watch it. Got to get some text messages going throughout the game. But before we get into it, I figured we'd go. There was a big topic of debate going into the game, which was if Mahomes had three-peated, would he have been greater than Tom Brady? So here is your Tom Brady trivia. What is the largest deficit that Tom Brady lost a Super Bowl by?
That he lost a Super Bowl.
Yep.
Ooh. I don't know that off the top of my head. Let me guess. I'll say 10.
All of Tom Brady's Super Bowls, he never lost by more than one score.
Wow.
Which I saw this trivia. I saw that one, and then the one that really got me was Tom Brady lost all of his Super Bowls by combined 15 points.
Oh my good. I mean,
the Chiefs lost by 18 last night.
How many did he lose though?
He lost 3.
3? Yeah.
Yeah, he could have had 10. I mean, there was a bunch of stats that came out about Brady. Brady in 10 Super Bowls had 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Mahomes so far in this is 8 touchdowns, 7 interceptions.
Yeah, I saw a lot of this, like the GOAT debate. Like people talking like, oh, it's over. And like, I don't want to say that it's not over, but like, let's be honest, like it was never really a debate yet.
Correct.
Right? Like you're not the GOAT until you are. And I know that sounds stupid, but it's like, if anybody was truly debating that Patrick Mahomes right now is already the GOAT, you're silly. Like you're like, if that's your argument that he was already the GOAT, you're silly. Now, is he on a path to become the GOAT? Sure. And like just by losing this, that doesn't necessarily change anything. Like he still has that path. But like there's no question about it right now, before and after the game, Tom Brady is the GOAT. Like there is no you either are or you aren't. And right now it belongs to Tom Brady. If Patrick Mahomes can win another 3 Super Bowls or like, keep on this path, sure. Like he could eventually overtake and become the GOAT. But like just because they lost badly to the Eagles doesn't all of a sudden like, oh, he's done. There is no GOAT debate. And that's where I kind of go, well, there was never really a debate today. You know what I mean? Like today, it still is Tom Brady. Even if Patrick Mahomes would have won, it's still Tom Brady. Again, that gets Patrick Mahomes closer by far, but like it wasn't like he needed to win or lose for that debate to be ended. That's a silly thing in my mind.
I agree, and I think that this is going to come up like once we get through the game, sort of talking about these teams going forward, is we talk about the Patriots dynasty 20 years, and don't get me wrong, this Chiefs is a dynasty in the period that we're in, but we're going to start to talk about, where they're at as a team and how it looks going forward when we get through it. And just, I 100% agree with you. It's like, it's great that you've had this amount of success this early, but it's having success over as long of a period of time, as Brady, that's what builds that GOAT type of status.
Absolutely. And again, like, I can't remember who you were talking about that had said that. It might have been Gronk. Like, yes, in this little stretch of 5 or 6 years, is this Chiefs team just as good as like the Patriots were in their prime? You could argue yes, but like they've got to do it for like 3 times as long as they've currently done it to reach that status, right?
Yeah.
Like
this is 6 years.
Yes, we got spoiled by the Patriots because they were literally good for like 20 straight years, and I mean that's why. That's why like there is no GOAT debate right now, is because they did it for 20 years. No other, there's been plenty of teams in history flash in the pan, in a 2-3 year stretch that were just as good as any Patriots team ever was. But there has never been a team that was as good for so long. And that's kind of like the why Tom Brady is the GOAT and not Patrick Mahomes.
Brady also made it even easier when he went to the Bucks, and then he beat Mahomes.
Immediately won another Super Bowl. Yeah,
but we'll tag on to the sort of how hard it is to do this for as long as the Patriots did.
Called it
when we get to the end of it. But starting off this game, we were talking about this last night. I want to start off the episode because it was something that I think highlights this game, but more highlights Mahomes and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl when you look across like them throughout every Super Bowl they've been in. So the very first one, look back at Super Bowl 54, where they end up beating the Niners 31-20 in the first half. The Chiefs had 4 possessions, and in those 4 possessions, they went punt, touchdown, field goal, punt. They went into the half tied 10-10. So now they got down in the second half and mounted a comeback. But, in this scenario, you go, pretty good. They scored on 50% of their drives. Against Tampa Bay, you look at their possessions here. They went punt, field goal, punt, field goal. So in 5 possessions, you had 2 scores for 6 points. You went into half 21-6. Slow start by all means. Then you look at against the Eagles. They went touchdown, missed field goal, punt. Now, their defense had a fumble return for a touchdown, and it kept it close, which was huge in this game because they could have went down 31-7, but instead they went down at half 24-14 against Philly, mounted the comeback one. The next year against the Niners.
That was a shootout in the second half.
Yeah, shootout in the second half. Next year against the Niners. Punt, fumble, punt, field goal. So in 1 out of 5 possessions, they had 1 score of a field goal. Now, what was crazy is the Niners couldn't do anything with it. Went in half down 10-3.
Just another slow start. Lots of slow starts in the Super Bowl.
Last night, or a couple nights ago for the Super Bowl, punt, pick 6, punt, interception, punt.
Yeah. 0 points.
0 points. It's one of these ones where I think that we were accustomed to the Chiefs sort of starting slow. And I'm not sure about you, but at least me, when it went into half 24-0, I was still like, Chiefs can win this game.
Oh, yeah. I told you last night, like, this had Patriots, Jaguars from that, what year was that? Like, maybe like 2018, 2019, maybe, that AFC Championship, written all over it. Where, like, the Jags were just straight dominating the Patriots in the first half, and I remember exactly. I was in Oklahoma City in a B-dubs with like a bunch of dudes, and I remember not a single person in the world except the Jaguars thought they were going to win that game. It was just like, you knew it. You've seen that play out way too many times. This year for me was just a little different, primarily because that second pick. Yes, we have seen Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs come back plenty of times, so I wouldn't have been super shocked. However, in all those other years you're talking about with the slow starts, they had electric offense. Like electric offense. You could make an argument that the offense was what was winning him all of those games. And we've talked about it ad nauseum this year and kind of last year. They don't really have that offense anymore. Their defense is so much more improved, and that's what's been winning them a lot of games. But like when Mahomes threw that second pick, it was just kind of like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And again, you kind of knew like they don't really have the offense to mount this comeback. Now, I wasn't giving up on them because, again, their defense is super good. All it took is like another pick from Jalen or something and a defensive score, whatever it could be, and they could have gotten right back into it. But this one did feel a little different, especially at half. And then when, fast forward to the end of the game and you kind of know the result, you're like, yeah, that made a lot of sense.
It's easy to sit back after the game and say this, but especially during the game, and I think we saw some of it in the playoffs itself. My dad said it when we were texting back and forth during the game. He was like, dude, the Chiefs wide receivers look old, which we knew that coming in. Like D-Hop, back end of career. Hollywood, back end of career. Yes, they
Kelsey
have. Yeah,
at the end of. I mean,
Kelsey, when he caught that pass against the Bills, and it was sort of like, hey, like, is he going to get in the end zone? Like, I don't think so. Yeah. And people had been saying it all week, like, Kelsey was pulling a trailer behind him for most of this year. They really had Xavier Worthy, but then you think, Pacheco didn't look the same after coming back from injury. Really, Kareem Hunt, who, think about it, wasn't even on an NFL roster to begin the year, was sitting at home, looked better. I agree with you in terms of like the offensive capability that this year was not their year to get down by a lot. And sort of follow, and that's why I bring up like their past Super Bowls, for them to follow the same narrative of like, hey, we can afford a slow start because we have the talent to, get back into it. They still had Mahomes. Don't get me wrong. I don't think anyone was sitting back going, they can't get back into it. It was just one of those ones that, especially when after the first half, they didn't even go down and get 6. You were sort of like, this game's over.
They definitely miss Rashee Rice. Like, he was a big. Now I know he's been missing a lot of the year, but they won what, 16 games, 17 games, right? So it's like you didn't feel missing him because you had all these wins, but now all of a sudden when you got this huge deficit and you're forced to throw the ball, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, man, we miss our number one guy. That being said, this is kind of like what I talked about in the preview of like, this is why it's so hard to three-peat and why it's so hard to win so many times in a row. It's just because you said it last night, like Father Time always wins. And sometimes that's with like body and age. Sometimes that's with just like, as you get good teams, people all of a sudden want to get paid. Contracts need to be written. You can't write a huge contract for everybody. So teams get broken up. People get older. People get injured. Like there's all of these things that happen over time. And it's very, very difficult to keep that level of roster together for that long of a time. That's why I say, like, yes, the Chiefs right now in this 6-year span have been good, but we could be looking at like that era ending. And all of a sudden, like the Eagles, who just won, when you look at their roster and you're like, man, filled with young guys, like who are still on the upslope of their career. I'm not saying the Chiefs can't compete anymore, but all I'm saying is that like there's changing of the guard, and it's been happening since the beginning of time. We're in a weird spot because we saw the Patriots do it for 20 years, right? And it's like, I'm only 36, so 20 of those years, the Patriots were good, right? So it's like, yeah, you can do this. The Patriots did it. But it's like, that's never been done before. Like, that's why it was so impressive for what they did.
You bring up the Eagles roster. That was like the big difference is you look at the Eagles and you're like, they're a super young team. Who's the oldest guy on the roster? Like in my mind, I'd go Jalen Hurts. Like in terms of like skill position, yes, offensive linemen and defensive linemen, they got some old guys. But in terms of like, you look at their defense and it's like pick 6, rookie. Their other corner, Mitchell, rookie. A year removed from drafting Jalen Carter. Just a sophomore pretty much. It's like they are very, very young. The Chiefs have very good players, but at the same time, it's like if you now post this win, compare the two, you're like, yo, the Chiefs are old. Like they have a lot of guys that you are now going to sit back and question. It's like, yes, we paid Chris Jones, who in all other Super Bowls looked phenomenal.
Yeah, he didn't do anything.
The only tush push I saw, he was laying on the ground sideways to like, and it didn't stop anything.
He got more action praying on the sideline and fixing his knee brace. Like that was what I saw Chris Jones do in the Super Bowl.
You're not wrong. And then Kelsey, dropped a few. Just he wasn't the four. Which I'll say that we talked about this last night with Kelsey. This is what happens when you don't have those other players at the position of wide receiver to make Kelsey better. It's not that Kelsey's like washed up, he's done, he should retire. I think he's definitely not in his prime, But when you don't have any other receivers that like a defense is like, this is the threat.
Yeah, we got to stop this guy.
Yes. Yeah. Which, let's be honest, the best way to beat Mahomes is exactly what we saw. I told it to Pops. It is a defensive line. And there was this stat that I thought was like...
They were getting home with 4 people.
Yes.
That's all they needed.
They legitimately, he had 42 dropbacks. He got pressured 16 times, sacked 6 times. They blitzed 0.
They didn't need to. They didn't need to because they were getting home with 4 guys, which made it more difficult for him to step up and find those pockets that they're always good at doing, because usually the only way you're getting pressure is if you're bringing an extra guy. So there's a pocket somewhere. And because they didn't have to bring that guy, there was no pocket. They couldn't find anything.
Now I do want to bring this up because it is humorous from the standpoint of, like, when you look at it on the back end, you almost want to rub it in a Chiefs fan's face of, this is also what happens when you don't get the calls that you're like accustomed to.
Yes. And like, I'm not going to sit back and say like it was a perfectly called game, because I even said like there were a few
that went against the Chiefs,
questionable calls against the Chiefs, right? And you're just like, God, you hate to see it, but at the same time, it's like, now you kind of know what literally like every other team has been complaining about for the last 2 years. And I'm not saying it makes it right or that they should have called, that one Goddard hit was, I think, kind of lame. The Saquon Barkley hit was kind of lame.
And then Jalen Carter punched him.
And then the fact that they didn't call that, like, those are those calls that like the Chiefs always get or don't get called on them. That affects the outcome of the game, and nobody likes to see that. And it's like the one time it doesn't go in the Chiefs' way, they kind of get blown out. And again, I'm not saying that the Chiefs are bad. I'm just saying, like, you hate to see that be a part of the game. And I mean, we talked about it all year. The Chiefs were good, but they got lucky and like just good breaks on so many they had like 12 one-score games. Like,
it's like the Vikings a few years ago.
It's just like, come on, like, you can't say that you were super shocked when this did happen the way that it played out.
Yeah. On the other side, though, I remember telling my dad going into half, it's like the Eagles really hadn't done a whole lot on offense. Yes, they had 24 points. 7 of that pick 6. Another 7 was because they were given the ball at the 10 post that second pick.
Yeah.
In my mind, I'm like, I thought the Chiefs defense played really well that first half. You were going in 10-0. Like,
if you would have said, like, at the beginning of the game, hey, y'all are only going to allow Barkley to have however many yards he had,
47 yards rushing,
they'd have been high-fiving, sizing themselves up for their third ring. You know what I mean? And like, because they did exactly what their game plan was to do, and it was not let Barkley get rolling. I mean, we talked about it. Like, I was giving the MVP at halftime to Cooper DeJean. Like, I know that is a stretch, and it wouldn't have happened. But like, other than giving it to the Chiefs' like entire defensive unit, you got to give it to one player. Like, I'm giving it to Cooper DeJean. Now, I think you were going to go on with a point for the second half, and I'll let you make it before I add on to it. But
well, the point, I mean, I know where you're going with it because I thought it was true. Everyone, to a man, I really do think, thought Chiefs are going to come back and make this game in the second half. You were waiting for it. The Eagles' defense rose to the occasion, absolutely. But at the same time, like, my biggest question mark going into the game was Jalen Hurts. And it was just because time and time again, more times than not, in the biggest of moments, you just didn't see him make that play that it was like you needed to see him make. And I'm not saying that he made some, don't get me wrong, this pass to Devontae Smith was perfect. That wasn't even the nails in the coffin. That was literally throwing dirt on the coffin as it was in the ground. The game was over at that point. But I have to give it to Jalen. When you watch the second half, it's like all the opportunities that you could have let the Chiefs come back in the game, like not getting the runs, throwing a pick, doing the fumble like he did last time. It was like you had all the opportunities that he could have easily let the Chiefs make it competitive again, but every single time, they put their foot on their throats and they finish the game.
Yes. There was no like, one individual play that, the Patrick Mahomes like horizontal around the guy, or like a Saquon Barkley 360 jump spin that Jalen did that was like, oh man, did you see that one play that solidified his MVP? That's the point you're making.
Yeah.
But it was just every, and I don't just say like fundamental, because there was a lot of scrambles and but it was just like he did exactly what he needed to do for the game script that was playing out in front of him to, like you said, just keep the foot on the throat and not let them back in it. Obviously, that helped with the defense just absolutely shutting them down. You know what I mean? There was like no pressure of a comeback really ever. So he was able to play very freely. But yes, I agree with you. Like, he just played that game perfectly for what was requested out of him. And that's why he won the MVP.
100%. And it was great to watch. It's not that I think everyone was pulling against the Chiefs, don't get me wrong, but for me, the Chiefs didn't have any Alabama players in the game. So it was nice to see Jalen, Devontae, a lot of guys on that Eagles team who are, honestly, they've been in the league now for 4 or 5 years. It's difficult to get back. Like, it's the fact that we talked about this last night. So Jalen is now one of 4 quarterbacks in NFL history who lost their first Super Bowl and then came back and actually won another one. He's the first one since 2000 to just
even make it back.
Back. Like, and you think about the list that comes out of like guys that made it, lost their first one, Joe Burrow, a bunch, Cam Newton, bunch of different guys that had a lot of promise that have yet to been able to Burrow can't even get back into the playoffs. The guys that he tied with, and really shows you how rare it is, the last guy to do it was John Elway. And then before him, it's Bob Greasy and Len Dawson. Like, we're going pre-Super Bowl 10 for those next 2 guys on the list. It's just something that doesn't happen, and you have to give him credit. Like, it's so difficult to do what he did. He did it. Hats off to the Eagles. They did something that does take a tremendous amount of, effort, which it's not just effort. We were talking about this and we've talked about all season with like the Eagles did the good things in terms of like draft. You look at how they draft, like they get a gift in Jalen Carter not going number 1 and falling to him. Yep. Like, he should have been the number 1 overall pick. They get Cooper DeJean and Traylon Mitchell, 2 corners that a lot of people, no one wanted Cooper DeJean. Why? Because he's white. Like, that's why. He had great speed. He had all the testables. But they were just like, I don't know. This is not the guy that is typically fits this mold. They've drafted in, you look at Nolan Smith, you look at their defense and even their offense. It's like, dude, they are a young team. They've made really good decisions with drafting players, because at the same time, you think about where the Eagles were 5 years ago compared to where they are now. It's like they're no different than the Giants. Like, the Giants had Saquon, they had pieces on the roster. It's like, but what did they do? It's like they chose to pay Daniel Jones $160 million. He's not even on the team anymore. They chose to let Saquon go, which, let me tell you, the digs at the Giants this whole time have been amazing. The best one is Saquon, like, before the Super Bowl, they're like in a car and they're like, how did you tell your family? Like, was it hard of the move? And he's like, well, when I told my daughter, she was like, does this mean we're finally going to win? And God, buried him. So I look at this and I think that's sort of like we're getting to that point of going post this game. And I wanted you to talk about it because you were bringing it up last night with like the Chiefs, how hard it is. You take a look at a roster, like it's something that when we look at both of these teams going forward, you go, don't get me wrong, the Chiefs still have Mahomes. It's easily doable, but the Chiefs have, I think, a lot harder of a road going forward.
Oh, yeah. You think of like the point I'll make towards that is like you look at the Eagles last year. They had a very similar roster, but they did not do well. Like, they struggled. But they had the pieces there. It was young. There, it was, you were able to kind of make excuses for like why they weren't succeeding, and they were missing one piece, and they bring in Saquon, and boom, look what happens. hard part with the Chiefs is like, where do they go? I mean, are they still good? Yes, but they're like very experienced and on the downslope, because it's like you got second place. Do you know where that puts you in the draft? The bottom. You know what I mean? So it's like, man, you don't even have this like great ability now to like rebuild or like get a good draft pick to fill a hole, because you go like, what do they need? They've got good players that are going to be hard to replace, but those good players are also like on their way out. You know what I mean? So like they're in a tough spot going forward, and I'm not saying they can't do it. Like, as long as Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are still there, they're a threat. Period. Dot. But it's going to be an uphill climb, especially with some of these teams that are coming on now. I mean, the Ravens and the Bills are going to be threats for years to come. Joe Burrow is always kind of a threat against the Chiefs.
Look at their own division.
Yeah. Yes.
Pete Carroll, Raiders. Harbaugh, Chargers.
Bo Nix is playing great with Sean Payton and the Broncos. Like, it's going to be a tough uphill battle from here on out with them. Like, it's not going to be easy. And I'm not saying it's going to happen. Like, this is not my prediction. I'm just saying, like, I will not be shocked if the Chiefs like really struggle or like barely limping into the playoffs over the next 3 years. You know what I mean? Like, that's what always happens. Outside of the Patriots, who did it for 20 years, that's what happens to these teams. You get 4, 5, 6 years of like really, really good teams, and it's like, man, we're unstoppable. And then
the window closes.
It closes, and it's a cycle. It's somebody else's turn. You know what I mean? Like, that's what happens.
And to put that into perspective, like when you sit back and talk about these players, like I look at it, they have Joe Tooney, who's really an offensive guard playing tackle, got exposed against Josh Sweat and the Eagles. You look at wide receivers, it's like, can Mahomes make this roster work? Yeah, he took it to a Super Bowl. Don't get me, but this is like sort of the Aaron Rodgers of Green Bay, when it was like, I want a wide receiver. Please draft me a wide receiver in the first round. How much better could I be? But it was like, we have all these other holes that we got to go fill. It's like, they are probably going to lose Trey Smith, their other guard, to free agency. Why? Because of what you talked about. It's like, don't get me wrong, guys like Kelsey have taken sweetheart deals that have helped them out with the cap, but other guys are not always going to do that.
True. And that's another point. Like, people are going to think I'm like a Patriots homer, but this is just like, do you remember who all the Patriots draft picks were over those 20 years? No. You know why? Because they didn't do it. Because they were always at the bottom, because they kept winning Super Bowls. But what they did was, Tom Brady was taking smaller contracts. Gronk was taking smaller contracts. They were bringing other people in from other teams who were already proven, and they just did it year in and year out and gave up tons of draft picks because they weren't trying to fix one individual hole here with like a draft pick. They were just like, hey, it was very like Moneyball-ish, where it was just like, we need to fill a hole with not the next superstar, but with someone who will just fill that hole for what our team needs, and they were able to do it. That's tough to do. Like, it's hard to get everybody to buy in.
Well, and for Chiefs fans listening, I think an easy example of this, of, hey, here's a guy that went high in the Chiefs draft that really just didn't work out. It's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like, was he good? Yes. But in terms of did he produce? No. Like, eventually they went with a 6th-round pick, I believe, in Pacheco. Like, they allow those picks to happen later in the draft. And yes, you sit back and how can the Chiefs immediately get good? I would trade the end of the 1st-round pick to the Browns to see if I can go get Myles Garrett. It's like, how can I immediately make my defense player better? That. And the Chiefs, I agree with you. I'm not going to sit back and tell you they're not going to make the playoffs next year. As long as they have Mahomes, it's sort of like exactly like the Patriots. As long as they have Belichick and as long as they have Brady, they're going to win games.
Yeah,
like
100%.
We're not talking about them turning into the Cleveland Browns here.
Yes.
They're a very good football team, but from a standpoint of when you look at why they lost the Super Bowl, why did they get smacked by 18 points? And honestly, let's get really real here. They were down 34-0. They gave up 34 unanswered points. And the only reason it wasn't worse is because the Eagles put in Kenny Pickett. Like,
Yeah.
they gave a Gatorade bath at the 2-minute warning. Like,
It was over.
it was over. Like, the game was over in the fourth. The second he hit Devontae Smith on that pass, it was toast. Mainly because it's, yet again, I go back to this like father time. It's why the Patriots needed, to get Matt Ryan to fumble to be able to come back in the game. It's like the clock is your enemy. Like, you just can't come back from that many scores without, even when Mahomes threw that dime to Xavier Worthy, it was like, oh, we're down 18. It's like, you got a minute and 40 seconds. That means that you have to get 3 onset kicks, and you got to score each of these in under 30 seconds, and you have to get 2 on point, like 2-point conversions. It's over. It's over. So transitioning sort of into, the postseason for these teams, we talked about the Chiefs a lot. Eagles, what do you look at them like? Are you a believer in terms of the Eagles are the favorite next year? Where would you sit back and sort of put the Eagles in terms of going into next season?
I mean, I think they're the favorite in the NFC for sure, just because, I mean, you look at like who their threats are. Washington is probably their really only threat in their own division. And I mean, we've seen that story play out with like a really good rookie QB that just doesn't quite necessarily get it done in the second year. But either way, like, you think that the Eagles are at least, they're going to either win their division again or at least get a wild card spot. So they're back in the playoffs almost immediately. The NFC North is a problem. Everybody up there is a problem. But that's about it. I mean, the NFC South is kind of a joke. I mean, like, Baker's doing good things with the Bucs, but again, that's another like aging roster that is just more beneficial that they play in the worst division in football kind of deal, And then you got the NFC West that is, I mean, the Rams are an aging roster. They're going to lose Cooper Kupp. The Niners are in trouble. I mean, they've got a lot of issues now that they signed Ayuk. Like, that's
they're done.
I mean, like, yeah, there's not a lot of threats out there right now against the Eagles, especially on the NFC side. It's kind of funny because it goes more against the Chiefs of like all the good teams that are like, man, who can beat those guys? It's all in the AFC. Like, again, you got the Ravens, you got the Bills, the whole AFC West is a problem. The Bengals can always be a problem. Like, it's a tough layout.
The Texans will heal up at the position of wide receivers. They should do better. And I guess that's a good transition, but instead of going through each individual team, I think this is always like one of these interesting ones is we know that the playoffs this year will not be the same as the playoffs next year.
Yeah.
So this year, Chiefs were the number 1 seed. You had the Bills at 2, Ravens at 3, Texans at 4, followed by the Chargers, Steelers, Broncos. When you hear all those teams, who are the teams that you sit back and go, these are the teams that I would count on being in it again next year, but these are the teams that if I had to sit back, I'm like, ugh, like I don't see them making it. These are the ones that I don't see making it next year.
I think the Ravens are like the best team in football right now. I mean, like outside, like on the AFC side, like I think they've got everything they need. Like they might be missing like one wide receiver or, Mark Andrews' finger or something. But like
hands,
they got it, dude. Like they're there. You know what I mean? They're the biggest problem. I still think the Chiefs are there. I still think the Broncos are there, honestly. Like, Bo Nix surprised me with how well they did. I think that's a good testament to Sean Payton. The Steelers, I think, are out. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it's very similar, but it's just like the Steelers and the Bengals swap.
And then you got Chargers, Texans of the other 2 teams.
Yeah, I can't see anybody other than the Texans right now really making a threat. And then the Chargers are still there. I wouldn't be surprised maybe if like the Chargers stayed or like I honestly don't think the Raiders can pull that quick of a flip around. We'll see. There's just a lot of off-season things that need to happen. But I don't think the Jets got it. I don't think the Dolphins got it. And the Patriots definitely don't got it. So that's kind of, if anything, I would say the one change would be that the Bengals take it instead of the Steelers.
Well, there's really just two good divisions in the AFC. There's the AFC North and there's the AFC West. And the other ones, you sort of know, like you said, it's the Bills and the Texans. And until a history that has already proven itself in the last few years changes in terms of those teams staying bad, like, can Miami make a run? Yeah, but the problem is I would argue Miami has just as many holes as the Chiefs do, except, let's be honest, they don't have Mahomes, Adam at quarterback. Now, I saw this. I have not sent this to Pops, and I hate doing this without him on the episode. Hopefully he'll tune in. If anything, I'll just tell him, hey, you need to listen. I saw this tweet, and I was like, man, that's true. The Super Bowl is exactly what you would have saw if Mahomes was on the Bears. Running for his life. The result, yes, he would have had a guy, but I don't know if the result's any different if he's on the Bears. I think that, yes, the Bears are a lot better. They're going to win more games, but he's getting blown up a lot more than he would have been on the Chiefs. I know that's a little bit of a, hop away from the playoffs. Now, the more crazy one's the NFC, because we were talking last night. This one's wide open. Yeah. The Lions, number 1. Eagles were 2, Bucks were 3, Rams were 4, followed by the Vikings, Commanders, Packers.
See, and honestly, the only 2 that I would even say I'm confident about would be the Eagles, and again probably the Bucks because of how bad that division is. But I know the NFC North was a powerhouse this year, and I was just talking about how they're. But to be honest, the Lions, they lost both coordinators. I don't know what Dan Campbell can do and who he brings in that turns around that issue. Someone's going to win, obviously, up there. I think the Packers are in the best spot from a stability standpoint, because the Vikings as well, they got exposed. I think they're doing fine. Darnold, I know there's a lot of people that don't have faith in Darnold. So again, there's some question marks there. But again, the Cowboys are in an awful spot. Giants are in an awful spot. Most of the NFC South is in a pretty bad spot. The West is it's questionable. The Seahawks aren't really a threat. The Rams, depending on what happens with Cooper Kupp, he's probably gone. Matt Stafford's getting old. You know what I mean? The Niners are in an awful financial situation. There's not a lot of.
You don't trust Kyler Murray?
No. So much so I forgot the other team in the NFC West for a second.
We talked about this, and I think it's good to bring up since we got extra time, and it's not often I got you at the house to talk football. Yes, the Lions lost 2 coordinators. From a standpoint of a roster, the Lions have a ton of pieces still in play.
Very true.
Their window's not closed in terms of the players. I think it's getting closer to being closed just because it's look, David Montgomery's not getting any younger. It's only going to be a year or 2 before Jameson Williams loses that step of speed. Sort of like Deshaun Jackson when he was in the league. Those first 5 or 6 years, dude, no one could get to him. But then, it was just one off season later. You're he's not that downfield threat that you have. I'm not mad at Aaron Glenn leaving because you pointed out at no point do I think that anyone sat back and was like, man, Lions defense. Yeah,
what's the strong point of the Lions? Nobody said defense.
Correct. I think it's good for him to move on to the Jets. I feel bad for him because he's going to be fired within 3 years because it's the Jets. You're not going to win that situation. Ben Johnson, on the other hand, I want you to talk about this. I'll talk about it from the Lions standpoint. You talk about it from the Bears standpoint. It is an offensive league. Finding a play caller is not, in my opinion, extremely difficult because they have the talent. You're literally, if Kellen Moore, who got fired from the Cowboys, fired from the Chargers, who honestly through the first 4 games of this season, people were like, stop throwing the ball, hand it to Saquon. And finally, when he did, they were like, we're winning games.
He had to give over the playbook essentially to the offensive line coach.
Yeah, when that changes. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what the Lions do well on offense. Transition that to now the Bears. I thought that you have a good perspective that yet again, Pops is not here to defend himself, but I think it's a good prediction.
Pops would probably agree with me on this. And like, when you have these coaches that are good at coming up with I won't say gimmicky plays, because that almost like undervalues it, but like
they tailor it to the players
that are good at creating these plays that people maybe haven't seen before, or get certain guys open at the right times. I compared it to, and it's the only reason I did is because he went to the Bears. I compared it to Matt Nagy and Mitch Trubisky. If in like people's minds, people are like, Matt Nagy, terrible coach. Mitch Trubisky, terrible quarterback. People forget they had a crazy productive offensive year that
double doink year.
Yeah, that might not have been their first. Was it their first year together? I can't remember. Maybe it was their second year. But like all it took was like just a little bit of comfortability between the two, and then boom, they're like putting up points, and everybody's like, "What is this?" You know what I mean? And it's because you get a creative mind calling offensive plays, and an athletic guy that they don't have a ton of film on. Trubisky at the time was kind of this new, we don't have a ton of film on how to guard this guy. If that doesn't sound like Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, I don't know what is, right? So like, and I'm not like hating on the Bears. This is like, they may have a pretty good year next year. This might be one of those changes that happens in the NFC playoff picture where like the Bears because Caleb Williams is clearly athletic and Ben Johnson can call plays. The defense for the Bears is clearly good. They had some issues, with Hail Marys and stuff. but right, the strength of the Bears was their defense for sure, right? So all of a sudden they get a good, strong defense and like just enough creativity with an athletic quarterback and a good play caller. They might win some games and surprise a lot of people. People will be like, heck yeah, the Bears are back. And just as quickly as it happened, poof, Matt Nagy and Mitch Trubisky are on other teams and getting fired, and your backups, right? Because like that only lasts so long once people get film and develop on you, and then just go, all right, we figured out how to stop this. So I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying like there could be hope for the Bears, but like I don't think it's like an all in. It just there's a lot of coincidences and like weird. That's pretty close to what we've already seen before that could happen.
It makes me want to go back and like. We talk about the Pats. I want to leap praise on the Chiefs because it's so difficult. Like people forget that it's like they've been to 5 Super Bowls, like in the past 6 years. The Lions have never been to one. Neither have the Texans or the Jags, or the Browns. There were plenty of teams that their fans would give anything. And I sit back and I look at these teams and it's like, guess what? If you are the Lions or the Vikings, this is sort of the time to like sell out because ultimately you've never been better. You're really just missing like a few pieces. Like if I'm the Lions, I am selling the farm I'm pulling at LA Rams. Like forget those picks. I'm going to trade them all. I'm going to go get Myles Garrett. I'm going to line him up as opposite side of Aiden Hutchinson and we're winning this thing.
Filthy.
And that's where I sit back and I go, this idea that you're going to now try to replicate what the Chiefs are doing or what the Patriots did, like there's really only one team in the NFL at a time that's able to do that because of what you talked about. Time kills everything, but then rosters change because guess what? You win a Super Bowl, guys are sitting back and they're like, I look at the Eagles roster and it's like, guess what? If Cooper DeJean and Mitchell and Jalen Carter play as good as they can for the next few years, they're not all going to get their max contracts. Yeah, you're going to lose one of those guys,
right? Like 100%. They're not keeping them all.
The Bengals are having a hard time keeping both Chase and Higgins and Burrow. That's why they don't have a defense because you can't pay anybody else. Like they're broke. I sit back and this was my question to you last night. It's an interesting proposition. I know we're like getting into the weeds of like off-season stuff. The Lions window's now. Like the window is closing. It may have already closed as you talked about with the loss of the coordinators. is Goff the guy? And if he's not, my question is there's been a lot of rumors that Stafford could be on his way out of LA. Do you bring back Stafford? Like, do you get the veteran quarterback? Like, I know that's wild to say, but like,
that seems like a Lifetime movie. You know what I mean? Like, that just seems too crazy. If you made me choose Stafford versus Goff on like a career standpoint, I'm picking Stafford every time. Right now in this second, dude, I don't really know. It's so close to me, like it really is, that I don't think it makes a difference. Like, if that's the move they make, well, then they're going to just make the playoffs and lose again, probably. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that like that minuscule bump that you maybe get, I would say it's probably debatable at this time because Stafford is getting up there in age. You get maybe a minuscule bump. That's not the difference that wins them the playoffs. You know what I mean? Now, you go get Myles Garrett, yeah. Like, you could win the playoffs with Zach Wilson. You know what I mean? Like, with that defense. But, I mean, you're right. Like, there's not a lot that they need. Terry Arnold will get another year of development, maybe help them out. Maybe they can get someone else in the secondary. But if they could go get Myles Garrett, or, I mean, gosh, just even having Aiden Hutchinson would have probably been the difference maker this year for them. You know what I mean? Like, that's
that and all the injuries.
That's the hard part with the Lions is like you said, like, their time is now. They have the talent. They're not missing a lot. They just missed what they had from an injury standpoint. So, I mean, again, without two coordinators, depending on who they bring in, who knows? But yeah, I mean, they could be dangerous, and I still do think that they're going to be. They're just in a really tough division. Like, that's the biggest threat to them.
Well, someone's fallen out. Like, I think it's Minnesota. We had this talk last night, which I agree with. It's not that you shouldn't pay him Deshaun Watson money. Maybe that's a bad analogy because no one should pay that type of money. In terms of Sam Darnold, it's one of those ones that's like, what would you rather have? Would you rather put everything on J.J. McCarthy, or would you rather give him a Baker Mayfield type of deal where you say, look, you're going to go out there, and if you perform like you did last year, it gives our rookie QB a chance to sit back, get some snaps on the fourth quarter or something, get some preseason, but there's not this enormous pressure on him to be the guy. Or, like, and this is why the Vikings have never won. Like, if you're asking me what do I think the Vikings do, it's going to be whatever the dumbest decision possible was for them to do this offseason with a quarterback. That's what they're going to do, and it will make them worse.
This one's tough. One, because I'm a Darnold fan, but, like, everybody saw the exact same thing, and it was like, ooh, Darnold can have really bad games and stretches that will lose you games.
So does Jared Goff.
So many quarterbacks struggle with that, right? That being said, I think that may end up working out in the Vikings' favor, and here's why. Darnold knows what everybody's saying about him. He's either living under a rock or doesn't have social media if he doesn't know. He knows.
Which is
that he doesn't deserve any money, right? That's a stretch. I do think he should be paid something, but I'm not saying that they need to sign him to some Baker type of deal. I don't know if he even thinks he deserves a Baker type of deal, and this is why I think it's in the Vikings' favor. They have a backup. They have McCarthy. They don't need McCarthy to be the guy right now. We've talked about this ad nauseum of having a rookie guy who's going to eventually be your guy to sit behind somebody, and it doesn't even have to be a superstar. I think Darnold's played enough places at a high enough level, and he clearly has the talent that he can make J.J. McCarthy really good eventually. They don't have to pay Darnold. If they don't want to, I think they can make some negotiation with Darnold of being like, hey, dude, we're not giving you that contract that you thought you were going to get at the middle of the season. We'll give you something, but like we've already got our guy. Like if you want to absolutely walk, you know what? Here's the door. We've already got a guy. You know what I mean? It's not like Darnold doesn't have a whole lot of like a leg to stand on to be like, you need me, because they can be like, here's our last game. We clearly don't. You know what I mean? But I do think that Darnold will also just be grateful to get something. Like, I think he's happy where he's at because he's been in so many bad places. He will recognize, like, you know what? Nobody's going to pay me a big contract because I've been exposed somewhat. Therefore, I'm already here. They're probably happy to keep me for something smaller. I'll take what I can get to stay a starter on a competitive team with good talent around me. And I really, truly do think that would be like the best thing for the Vikings because it saves them on money that they can pay other people. It gets JJ like another year of like good development. And then it keeps what they have currently going, which was a very good playoff level team. You know what I mean? Like,
came down to week 17 to determine the number one pick.
So I think they've got a solid shot there. Again, it's just tough that they're in the best division in football right now. So who knows?
I can see it. Like, what's the dumb thing the Vikings could do? It's like, oh, they could go out and sign Aaron Rodgers. Like, it just.
I mean, like, they could trade him to the Raiders. Like, Pete Carroll's like, hey, dude, I've already played with that guy. Like, go give me him. Or, you know, we got this USC connection. We need a quarterback super bad. You don't want to pay him? We'll take him off your hands. You know what I mean? And now they're relying, and you're throwing your rookie into not really a rookie anymore, but he didn't play, got hurt. Like, he doesn't have that development. You're throwing him into the fire and going, yeah, keep us up as a high-level playoff team. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. That's tough.
Well, there's going to be growing pains. I mean, Bo Nix did not look the same at the beginning of the year that he did at the end of the year. It takes time to develop, but it's one of those ones where, like, let's be honest. The Vikings, you look at, is Justin Jefferson probably the best, if not one of, it's between him and Jamar Chase of who the best receiver is in the NFL right now? Absolutely. Guess what? Here in a few years, Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams are coming out in the draft. They're going to make a team instantly better when they go there. Like, Father Time moves on. You have these, like, and we keep going back to this, but it is a good point because we started off the episode like this. You get these small windows. Some teams like the Chiefs, they draft incredibly well. They get lucky that the Bills want to trade back and give him Mahomes, trade back again and give him Xavier Worthy. Like, they get fortunate because they are in the right position to be able to go out and make good decisions in the draft. They keep some guys that still play well, like Laurinaitis, and they have Andy Reid at the helm, having Spag that chooses to not leave as a defensive coordinator and go be a head coach somewhere. Like, they get fortunate, and that's why they've been 5 in the 6 years. But even the Chiefs, as good as they are, you sit back and you look at them right now and you go, look, they are at a crossroads. Like, we are going to find out in the next 3 or 4 years, is this a team that's competing for a Super Bowl, or is this a team that's like, hey, they're just trying to keep Mahomes from getting murdered every game because Andy Reid's probably on his last year or two. If Kelsey comes back, I think next year's his last. I really think in the offseason, Kelsey's going to sit back and go, look, and I mean this from like an honest, Kelsey, it's between him and Gronk in terms of greatest tight end ever. He has nothing more that he needs to prove. Like,
he's already done it.
He's done it. Like, he owns all the records in the playoffs for tight ends, all the records in the regular season for tight ends. Like, he's proven he's won 3 Super Bowls. There's nothing that he really needs to accomplish. I think in the offseason, he's going to sit back and go, don't get me wrong, that competitive in him is going to want to come back, but he'll also sit back and be like, dude, like, this team, I
got a girlfriend making 10 times more money than I do.
10 times.
You know,
10
like,
times.
I'm just saying,
like a million times more. Like, she can pay for your salary on the Chiefs with one show. Like, sorry, I don't need you. You broke. You own a plane? No, I do. I go where you ask me if you want to ride on my plane. That's how it works. Like, I know it's not, but I sit back and it is a crossroads for all these. Like, you look at playoff teams, and that's the beauty of the NFL. Like, college, we got a little bit of variability this year because it opened it up to 12 teams. But let's be honest, at the Final Four, what was it? It was Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas, and surprisingly Penn State. Like, it was still power name teams. It just, the NFL, there's a lot more variability because you have a salary cap. Like, you you have a roster that ages. Like, it's difficult.
Moves have to be made every single year.
Yes. So I know that's a little bit longer of an episode. We'll get more into like off season and future episodes. We're not going to do every single week like we tried to do last year. It's just over the summer. None of you jokers listen to the episodes that consistently. And then 2, it's hard to like constantly come up with content. But we are going to do like a post like, hey, this is what I see teams trying to do in the offseason to fill some holes, especially going into the draft. That's probably where we'll get into it, of taking a look at here's the holes. Because once free agency, March 1st, a lot of teams are going to be cutting. That's where Aaron Rodgers is going to get cut. Kirk Cousins is going to get cut. You're going to find out where a lot of players go leading into the draft, because teams want to know. Just like you pointed out with Pete Carroll, it's like he'll probably have made a decision on Sam Darnold at that point to know whether or not, like, do I need to draft a quarterback, or do I have a guy that I can go out and get other pieces? Like, teams aren't going to go into unless you're the Browns, they're not going to go into the draft just being like eyes closed shut, just being like, I hope we find somebody that maybe makes some type of difference. So outside of that, anything else before wrapping up the 24 season?
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Time to pull chalks. We'll see you guys in the off season.